July 8th, 1943. A dusty convoy of army trucks rumbled through the gates of Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, carrying cargo that would transform both captors and captives in ways neither side could imagine. Inside sat 52 Italian prisoners of war, captured during the North Africa campaign and transported halfway around the world to a landscape as alien to them as the moon. They were exhausted, homesick, and completely unprepared for what they were about to taste. As the trucks came to a halt in the processing area, guards began directing prisoners toward the mess hall for their first meal on American soil. What happened in the next 2 hours would become a story told and retold for generations, a moment of culinary revelation that would ultimately bridge the gap between two cultures separated by war. Before we discover what made these soldiers plead for a recipe with tears in their eyes, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. 31-year-old Giovanni Rossi sat at the long wooden table in the mess hall, his hands folded in his lap as he waited for whatever meager rations the Americans would provide. He had served as a corporal in the Italian Army's 132nd Armored Division, fighting in the deserts of Libya with the conviction that Italy was reclaiming its ancient Roman glory. He had been told that Americans were uncultured barbarians who ate tasteless food and knew nothing of real cuisine. He had been told that Italian prisoners would be fed like animals, given slop unfit for human consumption. He had been told that America was a nation without soul, without history, without any appreciation for the finer things in life. As a tray was placed before him, Giovanni prepared himself for disappointment. What he saw instead made him lean forward with genuine curiosity. The tray held American military standard rations, but to Giovanni's practiced eye, the food looked better prepared than what he had been eating for the past 6 months in the desert. Meatloaf, properly seasoned and cooked through. Mashed potatoes that were actually creamy rather than lumpy and grey. Green beans that appeared to have been cooked recently, not reheated multiple times. White bread with butter, and a glass of cold milk that seemed impossibly fresh given the Oklahoma heat. It wasn't Italian food by any stretch, but it was real food, properly prepared, served with a casual abundance that contradicted everything he had been told about American deprivation. Around him, the other Italian prisoners were having similar reactions. 24-year-old Marco Benedetti, who had worked in his family's restaurant in Naples before conscription, whispered in Italian, his voice carrying professional assessment. "The meatloaf has good texture, they didn't overmix it, and the potatoes have real butter, not margarine." Several other prisoners nodded, their surprise evident. If the Americans cooked standard military rations with this level of competence, what did that say about Italian propaganda regarding American culinary barbarism? But it was 28-year-old Private Antonio Marino who noticed something that would change everything. A guard was walking between the tables, offering something from a wheeled cart, and prisoners ahead of them were accepting with expressions of genuine pleasure. As the cart approached, Antonio could see what it carried. Slices of pie, golden brown crusts filling that glistened with cooked fruit and the unmistakable aroma of cinnamon and apples. The guard stopped at their table, his expression neutral but not unkind. "Dessert," he said in English, then in carefully pronounced Italian. "Dolce." Antonio accepted a slice, staring at it with the focused attention of a man confronting something he couldn't quite believe. In 6 months of desert warfare, he hadn't seen fresh fruit. In the holding camp before transport to America, he had eaten nothing but dried goods and canned rations. And now, on his first day as a prisoner in enemy territory, he was being offered what appeared to be fresh apple pie, served warm with a crust that had obviously been made by someone who knew what they were doing. He picked up his fork, cut through the crust with a satisfying crunch, and brought the first bite to his mouth. What happened next would become legendary among the prisoners of Camp Gruber. Antonio's eyes widened. His fork froze halfway to his mouth for a second bite, His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and then something approaching reverence. "Dio mio," he whispered, loud enough that the surrounding prisoners turned to look at him. This is actually good." He took another bite, this time slowly, deliberately, as if conducting a professional tasting. "The crust is perfect, flaky but sturdy. The apples are tart and sweet at the same time. The spices are balanced. This is not barbarian food. This is real cooking." Giovanni reached for his own slice, skeptical but intrigued. He had been raised in Tuscany, in a home where food was taken seriously, where his grandmother had taught him that good cooking was a form of art and that Americans were incapable of such art. One bite of the apple pie destroyed that certainty completely. It wasn't Italian. The flavors and techniques were different from what he knew, but it was undeniably good, expertly crafted, made by someone who understood flavor, texture, and the alchemy of baking. As he swallowed, Giovanni felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the war, of the enemy, of everything he thought he knew about American inferiority. The morning of July 9th brought the prisoners their first full day in camp routine, and with it more opportunities to observe the unexpected competence of American food preparation. Breakfast was another revelation. Fresh eggs scrambled with what tasted like real cream, bacon that had been cooked to crispy perfection, toast that was actually toasted, not just warmed bread, and coffee, real coffee, strong and hot, and served in mugs that prisoners could refill as much as they wanted. Marco, the restaurateur's son, found himself unable to stop analysing every dish, his professional training overriding his circumstances. As the meal ended, Marco approached the serving line, where American kitchen staff were cleaning up. Through a guard who spoke some Italian, he managed to ask the question that had been burning in his mind since dinner the previous night. "The apple pie. Who made it? Can I meet the cook?" The guard looked surprised but intrigued by the request. After a brief consultation, he nodded. "Wait here. I'll get Mrs. Patterson." 10 minutes later, Marco found himself face to face with a woman in her 50s, wearing a kitchen apron and wiping flour from her hands. Dorothy Patterson had been cooking for the military for 2 years, supplementing her late husband's pension by working in the camp kitchen. She looked at the young Italian prisoner with curiosity and a touch of wariness. The guard translated as Marco spoke in rapid Italian. "He says the apple pie was the best he has ever tasted outside of Italy. He wants to know how you made it. He says he worked in his family's restaurant and he needs to understand your technique." Dorothy's expression softened, her wariness replaced by the universal response of cooks to genuine appreciation. "Tell him it's my grandmother's recipe," she said. "Oklahoma, apples, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, butter, and flour for the crust. The secret is you don't overwork the dough, and you use cold butter cut into small pieces." As the guard translated, Marco's eyes widened with understanding. "Cold butter," he repeated in Italian. "That's the secret to the flakiness. We use a similar technique in Naples for sfogliatella, but with different ratios." He looked at Dorothy with an expression that transcended language barriers. "Signora, would you teach me?" Private Billy Thompson, the guard serving as translator, was surprised by the request, but something about the genuine passion in the young Italian's voice made him bring it to his commanding officer. Captain James Harrison, the camp commander, was initially skeptical. Teaching enemy prisoners to cook seemed like an odd use of military resources. But his wife had convinced him before the war that food could build bridges that politics could not, and he found himself approving the request with the caveat that any teaching would occur under supervision and only during approved work hours. The breakthrough came on July 15th, during an afternoon when Dorothy Patterson was preparing desserts for the weekly Sunday dinner. Marco had been assigned to kitchen work detail alongside 8 other prisoners, primarily washing dishes and performing basic prep work. but Dorothy, with Captain Harrison's permission, had asked for Marco specifically to assist her with the pie preparation. As she worked, she explained each step in simple English that Marco's improving vocabulary could follow, supplemented by the universal language of cooking that transcended words. "You see here," Dorothy said, demonstrating how she cut the butter into the flour. "Small pieces, quick movements, you don't want the butter to melt from your hands' heat." Marco watched with intense focus, occasionally asking questions through Billy Thompson, who had developed a friendship with the young Italian and volunteered to facilitate these cooking sessions. "In Italy, we have a saying," Marco said through Billy. "The hands must be cold, but the heart must be warm. Good cooking needs both technique and love." Dorothy smiled, recognizing a kindred spirit. Over the next 2 hours, she taught Marco not just how to make apple pie, but the philosophy behind Oklahoma cooking. The importance of fresh ingredients, the value of simplicity done well, the way certain flavors could evoke home and comfort and memory. Marco shared his own knowledge in return, describing techniques from Italian cuisine that made Dorothy's eyes light up with recognition and curiosity. It was collaboration rather than instruction, an exchange between equals who happened to be on opposite sides of a war. When the pies came out of the oven that afternoon, golden and perfect and filling the kitchen with an aroma that drew prisoners and guards alike, Dorothy cut a slice and handed it to Marco. "You made this one," she said simply. Marco took a bite, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling on something that looked like peace. "It tastes like home," he said in Italian, then corrected himself in careful English. "No, it tastes like two homes, Italy and America together." August 20th, 1943, brought an event that would crystallize the cultural exchange happening at Camp Gruber in a way that recipes and cooking lessons alone could not. Captain Harrison, inspired by the success of the kitchen work program and the unexpected friendship developing between Dorothy Patterson and several Italian prisoners, decided to organize a cultural exchange dinner. The Italians would prepare an authentic Italian meal for the camp staff, and in return, Dorothy would teach them to prepare a full American Sunday dinner. The idea was ambitious and controversial. Some staff members felt it was inappropriate to celebrate enemy cuisine. Others worried about security or the message it might send. But Harrison believed that understanding your enemy made you stronger, not weaker, and that food was a safer avenue for that understanding than politics or military strategy. The Italian prisoners responded to the proposal with enthusiasm that bordered on desperation. For men who had been separated from their culture, their families, and everything familiar, the opportunity to cook the food of home was an emotional lifeline. Giovanni, who had emerged as the unofficial leader among the prisoners, proposed making a full traditional dinner: pasta with proper sauce, chicken cacciatore, roasted vegetables, and tiramisu for dessert. The preparations became all-consuming. Dorothy worked with Captain Harrison to procure ingredients that approximated Italian standards, a challenging task in wartime Oklahoma, but not impossible. The prisoners threw themselves into the work with an intensity that surprised the guards. Antonio, who had never cooked before the war, learned to make pasta dough from Giovanni, who had learned from his grandmother. Marco supervised the sauce preparation with the eye of a professional, adjusting seasonings and explaining the difference between quick sauce and slow sauce. Even prisoners who had no cooking experience participated, chopping vegetables and learning techniques with focused dedication. On the night of the dinner, the mess hall had been transformed. Tables arranged in a more intimate configuration. Place settings that showed care rather than military efficiency. And smells that made both Italians and Americans stop and breathe deeply. Garlic, tomatoes, herbs, and baking bread, scents that spoke of home and comfort and civilization. Dorothy Patterson stood near the kitchen entrance. Watching Giovanni and Marco plate the final dishes, her expression showing pride and something deeper. These young men, who had been enemies just weeks ago, had become her students, her friends, and in some way she couldn't quite articulate, her family. The meal was extraordinary. American guards who had never tasted authentic Italian food found themselves transported by flavors that were both foreign and somehow universal. The pasta was perfectly al dente, the sauce rich but not heavy, the chicken tender and flavorful. The tiramisu was a revelation, coffee-soaked ladyfingers and mascarpone cream, creating something that seemed too elegant for a military camp, but was nonetheless real and present and delicious. Giovanni watched the Americans eat, his face reflecting the same focus with which he had watched Dorothy make pie. He was seeing his culture through their eyes, understanding for the first time that Italian cuisine's reputation was earned, that food could be a source of national pride, that transcended military power. Captain Harrison stood after the meal, his expression thoughtful. "I want to say something," he began, his voice carrying through the quiet mess hall. "A few weeks ago, you men were enemies. You fought against American soldiers in Africa. You were on the opposite side of this war. But tonight, you reminded us that before we were enemies, we were all just people. People who love good food, who take pride in our traditions, who find comfort in the flavors of home." He paused, looking around at both guards and prisoners. "This war will end someday. When it does, I hope we remember nights like this. That we remember it's possible to respect your enemy, to learn from them, and to find common ground even in the darkest times." Antonio translated the captain's words for the prisoners who didn't speak English, and several men visibly fought back tears. Marco stood, his English now good enough to respond without full translation. "Captain Harrison, we are prisoners, yes. But tonight, you let us be Italian again. You let us share what we love most about our country. This is gift we cannot repay, but we try. We teach you Italian cooking. You teach us American cooking. Maybe this is how peace really starts. Not with politics, with food." September brought cooler weather to Oklahoma, and a subtle transformation in the camp's daily operations. The cultural exchange dinner had been such a success that Captain Harrison expanded the program. Italian prisoners could now volunteer for extended kitchen duty, learning American cooking techniques while also teaching Italian methods to interested staff. Dorothy Patterson, who had initially been hired just to supplement production, found herself coordinating an informal culinary school that operated within the framework of POW labour. Giovanni found himself increasingly drawn to these exchanges. His English improved daily, and with it came the ability to ask deeper questions about American cooking and culture. One afternoon in mid-September, he approached Dorothy during a break in the preparation work, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Patterson," he began carefully, "I want to understand something. The apple pie, the way you make it, it is very good. But it is simple food, yes? Not complicated like French cuisine or fancy like Italian dishes. Why does it mean so much to Americans?" Dorothy considered the question, recognizing its depth. "You're right that it's simple," she said slowly. "But that's the point. Apple pie is what mothers make for their children. It's what you smell when you come home. It's what we serve when we want someone to feel welcome and safe." She looked directly at Giovanni. "In America, we're all from somewhere else originally. My grandparents came from Germany. Captain Harrison's family came from Scotland. Billy's people were here before any of us. We don't have centuries of shared history like you do in Italy, so our traditions are newer, simpler, built around things everyone can share. Food that says home, even if your home was different from mine." Giovanni absorbed this, his expression shifting as understanding dawned. "So, American cooking is not trying to be Italian or French, it is trying to be American, to make something new from many different things." Dorothy nodded. "Exactly. And that's why your Italian cooking impressed us so much. You have depth of tradition we're still building, but our simplicity has value too. Different, not better or worse. The conversation continued for an hour, ranging from technique to philosophy to the nature of culture itself. When it ended, Giovanni felt he understood America better than any military briefing or propaganda could have taught him. October 12, 1943, brought news that would shift the dynamics at Camp Gruber in unexpected ways. Italy had officially switched sides, declaring war on Germany and becoming a co-belligerent with the Allies. The Italian prisoners at Camp Gruber were no longer quite prisoners, though they weren't quite free either. They existed in a legal and psychological limbo, enemy combatants who were now technically on the same side as their captors, but still confined to the camp. Captain Harrison called an assembly to explain the situation, his message delivered through multiple translators to ensure understanding. "Your status has changed," Harrison explained to the assembled Italians. "Italy is now fighting with the Allies against Germany. You are not enemies anymore, but you can't go home yet. The war continues. What I can offer is this: expanded privileges, including the ability to write letters home more frequently, opportunities for additional work assignments, and continued participation in cultural and educational programs." He paused, then added, "You'll still be here at Camp Gruber, but we'll treat this as a transition, not a punishment. You're no longer prisoners of war. You're more like displaced allies." The announcement created complex emotions among the Italians: relief that they were no longer considered enemies, confusion about their uncertain status, guilt about the men still fighting in Italy on both sides of the newly redrawn lines, and an unexpected sense of purpose. If they were going to be at Camp Gruber indefinitely, waiting for the war to end and transportation home to be arranged, then perhaps they could make their time meaningful. Marco was the first to propose what became known as the Recipe Exchange Project. "We should write everything down," he said to Giovanni and Antonio one evening in their barracks. "All the recipes we know, all the techniques Mrs. Patterson is teaching us, all the American methods we're learning. We should create a book, something we can take home to Italy, something that shows what we learned here." The idea caught fire among the prisoners. Men who had never shown interest in cooking suddenly wanted to contribute family recipes. Stories about grandmothers and mothers and traditional village festivals. Techniques passed down through generations but never written down because everyone just knew them. Dorothy Patterson, when told about the project, immediately volunteered to contribute American recipes in return. She spent evenings after her shift writing out detailed instructions for apple pie, fried chicken, cornbread, green bean casserole, peach cobbler, and dozens of other dishes that represented American cooking at its best. The guards, many of whom had learned to respect and even like the Italian prisoners, contributed recipes from their own families. The project became a collective effort, transcending the boundaries of nation and loyalty, creating something that belonged to everyone involved. By December, the Recipe Exchange book had grown to over 200 pages, handwritten in both Italian and English, with careful notes about technique and ingredient substitutions. It included traditional Italian recipes that predated the war by centuries and American recipes that were still being invented. It had Marco's grandmother's sauce recipe next to Dorothy's apple pie, Antonio's mother's wedding cookies, alongside Billy Thompson's family's cornbread. The book was a document of two cultures learning to see value in each other. And everyone who contributed felt they were creating something important. January 15th, 1944. Brought the day many prisoners had been waiting for with mixed emotions. The first group would be repatriated to Italy, returning to a country that was now a battlefield between former allies and current enemies. 25 men, including Giovanni and Antonio, would depart within weeks. The remaining prisoners would follow in subsequent groups as transportation and safety allowed. Captain Harrison arranged for a farewell dinner, a last chance for shared meals and shared memories. The menu was ambitious, a combination of Italian and American dishes, prepared jointly by prisoners and staff, representing everything they had learned from each other. Dorothy Patterson supervised the American components, while Marco coordinated the Italian preparations, both of them working side by side as equals, as friends, as fellow cooks who had found in each other a connection that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. The mess hall filled with scents that told a story. Garlic and cinnamon, tomatoes and apples, coffee and wine. Civilization in the midst of war. As the meal concluded, Giovanni stood to speak, his English now fluent enough to require no translation. When we arrived at Camp Gruber, we were defeated men. We had lost everything: our country, our pride, our purpose. We expected to be treated like enemies, like criminals, like less than human. He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. Instead, you gave us apple pie. And in that pie, we tasted something we thought we would never taste again. We tasted home. Not our home, but a home. We tasted the care that goes into good cooking, the traditions that make people who they are, the simple truth that food made with skill and love is food that says you matter. He looked at Dorothy Patterson, then at Captain Harrison, then at the assembled guards and prisoners. We are going home to Italy now, to a country that is broken and fighting itself and confused about who we are and what we should be. But we take with us this book of recipes, and we take with us the memory of Americans who showed us kindness when they could have shown us cruelty, who taught us their food and learned ours, who treated us like people, not like enemies. His voice broke slightly. The war is not over. Maybe it never will be completely over in our hearts. But when we make apple pie in Italy, when we teach our children to make the crust the way Mrs. Patterson taught us, we will remember that enemies can become friends, that food is stronger than hate, that a recipe is a form of peace. Dorothy stood, tears streaming down her face, and walked over to Giovanni. She pulled him into a tight embrace, the kind of hug a mother gives a son, and whispered something in his ear that only he heard. He nodded, his own tears falling freely now, and the entire mess hall erupted in applause. Prisoners and guards stood together, clapping for themselves, for each other, for the small victory of human connection in the midst of war's dehumanization. February the 3rd, 1944, brought the actual day of departure. 25 men boarded transport trucks bound for the port in New Orleans, beginning the long journey back to a homeland that would be almost unrecognizable. They carried their personal belongings, letters of recommendation from Captain Harrison, and carefully wrapped copies of the recipe exchange book, each one hand-copied so that every departing prisoner could have their own. Giovanni clutched his copy like a Bible, knowing it represented something more valuable than the recipes themselves. It represented the possibility of transformation, of learning, of building bridges, even when the world was busy building walls. As the trucks prepared to roll out, Dorothy Patterson ran from the kitchen, carrying a small package wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Giovanni through the truck's window. "Apple pie," she said simply, "for the journey. I made it this morning." Giovanni took the package, his hands trembling. "Mrs. Patterson, I promise you something. I will make apple pie in Italy. I will teach others to make it. And every time I do, I will tell them about the woman in Oklahoma who taught me that good food has no country. It just has heart." The trucks rolled through the gates, carrying men who had entered as prisoners and were leaving as something more. Ambassadors of an unlikely friendship, carriers of recipes that would cross the ocean and take root in Italian soil. Living proof that even war could not completely destroy the human capacity for connection and learning and growth. The 25 men scattered across Italy, returning to families who had survived through desperation and communities that were struggling to rebuild under occupation, liberation, and chaos. Giovanni found his family's home in Tuscany damaged but repairable. his parents and siblings alive, though marked by hardship. He shared the apple pie recipe with his mother, who wept as he described Dorothy Patterson and the kindness she had shown. Together, they baked it, making adjustments for Italian ingredients and Italian ovens, creating something that was neither purely American nor purely Italian, but somehow both. Antonio returned to his village outside Rome to find his wife waiting, having survived the German occupation through courage and luck. He brought out the recipe exchange book and showed her page after page of dishes from America and Italy, stories of food and friendship and the strange grace of kindness in captivity. They opened a small restaurant in 1946, serving both traditional Italian dishes and carefully adapted American recipes, creating a menu that told the story of transformation and bridge building. Marco fulfilled his dream and reopened his family's restaurant in Naples in 1947. But the menu now included a section titled Recipes from America, featuring apple pie, cornbread, and other dishes he had learned at Camp Gruber. He trained his staff in both Italian and American techniques, insisting that good cooking was good cooking regardless of origin. His restaurant became known for innovation, for honoring tradition while embracing new ideas, for proving that cultures could learn from each other without losing themselves. But the story's most remarkable chapter came in October 1968, when Dorothy Patterson, now in her 70s and a widow for over 2 decades, received a letter from Giovanni Rossi. He was organizing a reunion in Italy for all the former Camp Gruber prisoners who were still alive and able to travel. He wanted to honor the Americans who had shown them humanity during their captivity, particularly the woman who had taught them that an apple pie could be a form of peace. Dorothy, who had never left the United States in her life, decided that she would make this journey. Captain Harrison, long retired and living in Texas, agreed to accompany her. Billy Thompson, now a high school principal in Oklahoma City, joined them as well. They arrived in Florence in late October as the Tuscan hills turned gold and amber with autumn's arrival. 19 of the original Camp Gruber prisoners came, traveling from across Italy and even from other countries where they had emigrated. They gathered in Giovanni's restaurant, a successful establishment that served what he called Cucina del Ponte, bridge cuisine, honoring both Italian tradition and the lessons learned in Oklahoma. The reunion featured a ceremonial meal, prepared jointly by former prisoners and the American visitors who had once been their captors. The menu was deliberate and symbolic. Traditional Italian pastas and sauces, chicken cacciatore made according to Marco's family recipe, roasted vegetables seasoned with herbs from Antonio's garden, and for dessert, apple pie made using Dorothy Patterson's exact recipe, baked in an Italian oven by Giovanni's own hands. As the pie was served, Giovanni stood to speak, his English still fluent after 25 years. "We are here tonight because of a simple dessert," he began, his voice carrying through the crowded restaurant. "Because an American woman decided that enemy prisoners deserved to eat good food. Because she taught us not just how to make pie, but how to see that our enemies were people too. People with their own traditions, their own pride, their own valid ways of being in the world." He looked at Dorothy, who was dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "Mrs. Patterson, you changed my life with a recipe. You showed me that food is more than sustenance. It is communication. It is bridge. It is peace made real in flour and butter and apples." He raised his glass. "To the recipe that taught us we could learn from our enemies. To the pie that proved kindness is stronger than hate. To the woman who showed us that a true cook feeds everyone, even those who started as foes." Dorothy stood, her voice steady despite her tears. "Giovanni, Marco, Antonio, all of you boys, you gave me something too. You reminded me why I cook. Not just to fill stomachs, but to feed souls. To create moments of connection and understanding. To prove that no matter how divided we are by war or politics or fear, we all sit down at tables, we all eat, we all share. And when we share food made with care, we remember we're all human." Marco raised his own glass. To Dorothy Patterson, who taught us that apple pie is not just American food, it is hope baked into crust. It is the promise that enemies can become friends, that war can end, that recipes can cross oceans and build bridges that bullets could never destroy. The room erupted in applause and laughter, the sound echoing through a restaurant built on the foundation of recipes shared across enemy lines. They had proven that even in humanity's darkest hours, when nations sent young men to kill each other over ideology and territory, food could create connections stronger than propaganda. The Italian prisoners who had begged for apple pie recipes had learned the most important lesson of all: that real victory is not measured in territory conquered or enemies defeated, but in hearts and minds transformed by the simple act of sharing what we love, teaching what we know, and recognizing our common humanity in the universal act of breaking bread together.